You're in a cockpit. You're a junior officer in the seat next to your captain, and you know something's not right. One of the gauges is reading wrong. You can see it. Your gut is screaming. You glance over. He's calm. He's flown thousands of times. He says it's fine. And the moment he sounds that sure, your own certainty starts to drain away. The words are right there. That gauge isn't right. We should abort. But he's the captain. Who are you to overrule him? So you say nothing. 90 seconds later, your plane hits a bridge. 78 people are dead. And you could have prevented it by saying the sentence you'd already thought. That pull, the one that just silenced you, has a name. The authority effect. And by the end of this, you'll see exactly where it's running your own life. Air Florida Flight 90 wasn't a freak accident. When investigators went back through crash after crash, they kept finding the same ghost in the cockpit. The junior officer who saw it coming and went quiet. He'd hint, he'd drop a clue, he'd never quite say it, and the plane would fly into the ground. It happened so often the industry gave it a name, captainitis. The airlines didn't decide they had a few bad pilots. They decided this was wired into all of us, so they built an entire training system, used in every cockpit in the world today for one purpose, to force a junior officer to challenge his boss. They had to teach competent adults that they are allowed to speak up. So that's a cockpit, split-second decisions 30,000 feet up. But this isn't just a cockpit problem, a hospital, all the time in the world, and a label right in front of you that says, for all intents and purposes, don't do this. 1966. A man phones a hospital ward. The nurses have never met him. He says he's a doctor, and he tells them to give a patient a dose of a drug, double the maximum on the label, one that literally warns against that high of a dose. Everything about it is wrong. It breaks the rules. It comes from a stranger on a phone. 21 of the 22 nurses were going to do it. They had the bottle in hand and were on their way to administer the drug before the experimenters stepped in and stopped them. The nurses weren't panicking. They weren't being threatened. A confident voice claimed to be a doctor, and that alone was enough to override years of training. And this isn't even the worst example. You're at Yale University. You watch a man you have just met get strapped to a device. Then you go into the next room where you're seated at a shock generator with 30 switches. The switches are clearly marked, from slight shock all the way through to danger, severe shock, and then finally one marked XXX. You're informed of the voltages, ranging from 15 volts to 300, then to 450, well above lethal levels, depending on the amperage. The rules of the experiment are, anytime the other participant gets the answer wrong or doesn't answer, he gets a shock. So you begin, and with each wrong answer, you move to the next switch. Around 75 volts, the participant grunts with discomfort. At 120, he shouts that it was painful. At 150, he screams, demands to be let out, and says his heart is bothering him. You ask the man in the lab coat if you should keep going. He calmly says back, the experiment requires you to continue, so you do. At 270 volts, he screams in agonizing pain. At 300, he pounds on the wall and stops replying entirely. Again, you ask the man in the lab coat if you should stop. He calmly says the experiment must continue. So you shock him again. No reply. So you shock again, all the way to the switch marked XXX. The shock wasn't real, and the man in the next room was an actor, but the people flipping the switches didn't know that. All that stood between them and stopping was a man in a lab coat, calmly repeating one line. The experiment requires that you continue. About 65% of them went all the way to the end. So the experimenter changed the setup. He took it out of Yale and ran it out of a rundown office, and the obedience did drop. A shabby office gets less obedience than Yale because Yale carries more authority. That's the effect proving itself. It runs on a dial, and the dial is authority. The more legitimate the power looks, the more we'll do for it. It didn't take a weapon. It didn't take threats. It took a calm man and a clipboard to walk normal people up to what they believed was killing someone. But you don't need Yale. You don't even need a real doctor. In 1974, a researcher sent a man out onto the streets of New York to give strangers absurd orders. Pick up that bag, give a coin to that stranger by the meter, move away from this bus stop. In ordinary clothes, people mostly ignored him. Then, they put the exact same man, giving the exact same orders, in a security guard's uniform, and people obeyed. Same face, same request. The costume of authority was the whole difference. So average people can be duped. But what about the so-called authorities themselves? In one study, researchers hired an actor, gave him an impressive title, and sent him to lecture a room of trained professionals. The talk was deliberately nonsense, said with confidence, stitched together from invented terms and contradictions that added up to nothing. Afterwards, the audience rated him highly engaging, clear, and an expert worth listening to. Not one of them flagged that he had said nothing at all. We are so tuned to the signals of authority, the title, the coat, the certainty, that we don't even think to question it. And this isn't just history, it's you, right now. An authority tells you what's healthy, what's safe, what's true, and you rearrange your life around it without ever reading a single study. Not because you're stupid, because checking feels like arrogance. Who are you to question them? But official advice has flipped, over and over. Fat was killing us. Then it was sugar. Eggs were poison. Now they're a superfood. Each time, millions of people changed what they ate overnight, on the authority alone. Think of the rule at your work that everyone follows and nobody can explain. The form, the policy, that's just how it's done. You have obeyed 100 things this week that you never once examined because someone with a title said so. There are 2 questions you can ask yourself here, and most people reach for the wrong one. The flattering one, would I have flipped the switch? Everyone's sure they'd have been the one to refuse. The honest one is much quieter. Where, right now, in your own life, are you doing exactly what the authority told you without thinking for yourself, simply because they're the authority?